I always knew that the night shift in the office was a little creepy, but I never expected to experience anything truly paranormal. That is, until one fateful night. A night which left a horrific mark on my mind which I could never recover from. It was around midnight, and I was sitting at my desk, trying to stay awake as I worked on some paperwork. It was a very lousy night. I was already counting hours before I could leave for home. The office was quiet, the only sounds being the occasional creak of the old building and the tapping of my keyboard. Suddenly, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a soft whisper, coming from the corner of the room. At first, I thought it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I heard it again. It was definitely a whisper. I got up from my chair and walked over to where I had heard the noise. As I got closer, the whispering grew louder until I could make out what was being said. It was a woman's voice, and she was repeating the same phrase over and over again. "Help me," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Please, someone help me." I looked around the room, trying to find the source of the voice. But there was no one there. I was alone. Who was asking for help? Where was the sound coming from? Who was whispering in such a mysterious voice? Suddenly, I felt a chill run down my spine. It was as if a cold hand had reached out and touched me. I turned around, but again, there was no one there. I was terrified. That's when I saw it. In the corner of the room, there was a faint light, almost like a mist. It was hovering just above the ground, and it was getting brighter. I started to back away slowly, but then the light began to take shape. It was a figure, a woman in a white dress. Her hair was long and dark, and her face was twisted in agony. I couldn't move. I was frozen in place, watching as the figure grew closer and closer. Her eyes were fixed on me, and I could feel her pain and sorrow radiating outwards. As she got closer, I could see that her dress was stained with blood. It was as if she had been killed in it, and it had absorbed the blood from her wounds. She reached out a hand towards me, and I could feel the coldness of her touch. I wanted to run, to scream, to do anything to get away from her. But I was paralyzed, unable to move. The woman began to speak, her voice echoing through the empty office. "I am trapped here," she said. "Trapped between this world and the next. I can't move on, and I can't rest until someone helps me. Would you help me? Come to me." I could hear the desperation in her voice, and I knew that I had to do something. But what could I do? I was just a night shift office boy. Plus, the entire event was so horrific that I wasn't even able to make any sense of what was going on. I was definitely not going to help that ghostly woman or engage in any activity. I was terrified. I was dumbstruck and wasn't able to move. As I kept staring at the figure, the woman began to fade away, the light around her growing dimmer. "Please," she said one last time, before disappearing completely. I was left alone in the office, trembling with fear. I knew that what I had just witnessed was real, and that the woman's spirit was still trapped in that building. I was not dreaming or hallucinating. Something not normal had just happened to me, and I had no idea how to react or what to do next. From that moment on, I was never able to work the night shift again. Every time I walked into that office, I could feel her presence, her pain and suffering lingering in the air. And I knew that she would never be able to rest until someone finally helped her. Now let's hop onto story number 2, but before I begin reading, make sure that you have subscribed to Mr. Scare for regular horror podcasts. I had just landed my first job in the USA, and it was a late night shift job in a small, dimly lit office. I was super excited and nervous but determined to make a good impression on my first day. So I decided to stay back for a few extra hours. The other employees on my floor left around 3:30 a.m., leaving me alone in the building for my night shift. As the night progressed, I found myself getting increasingly anxious. The silence of the office was only broken by the occasional sound of the air conditioning unit kicking in. I tried to focus on my work, but I couldn't shake off the feeling of unease that was creeping up on me. Around 4:30 a.m., I was deep in thought when I heard a loud creaking noise coming from the hallway. My heart started racing as I tried to brush it off as just the old building settling. But as the creaking continued, I started to get more and more anxious. I tried to convince myself that it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but then I heard something even more terrifying. A faint whispering sound seemed to be coming from the darkness of the hallway. I couldn't make out what was being said, but it sent shivers down my spine. I tried to ignore it and focus on my work, but the whispers got louder and more urgent. I could feel my hands shaking as I tried to type on my computer. I started to second-guess my decision to work in the night shift on my first day itself. Suddenly, the whispers stopped, and everything was quiet once again. I felt a sense of relief until I heard a sudden thud coming from the hallway. It sounded like someone had dropped something heavy. I got up from my desk and cautiously made my way towards the source of the noise to find out what had happened. As I turned towards the corner, I saw a figure standing in front of me. It was dark, and I couldn't make out any features, but I could feel its eyes staring directly at me. I froze, unable to move or speak. Suddenly, the figure started moving towards me. It was slow at first, but then it started picking up speed. I turned around and ran back to my desk, my heart pounding in my chest. As I sat at my desk, trying to catch my breath, I could hear the figure getting closer and closer. I didn't know what to do, so I grabbed my things and ran out of the building as fast as I could. I never returned to that office again. The fear and terror that I felt that night were too much to bear, and I knew that I couldn't work in an environment where I felt so unsafe. I realized that maybe night shift jobs aren't really my thing. To this day, I don't know what that figure was or why it was haunting me. Or if the figure was a person instead and not a ghost. Maybe I will never know. But all I know is that I never want to experience anything like that again. As a cybersecurity expert, I was used to dealing with all sorts of digital threats, but nothing could have prepared me for the paranormal event that occurred during my night shift at the office. It started like any other night. I was working on my computer, monitoring the network for any suspicious activity when I started hearing strange noises coming from the server room. It sounded like someone was moving around, but I knew I was the only one in the building. I went to investigate, my heart racing with anticipation. As I opened the door to the server room, a chill ran down my spine. The room was dark, except for a faint flicker of light that seemed to be coming from one of the servers. I approached the flickering server, my eyes fixated on the screen. The words on the screen seemed to be changing on their own, and I knew that something was not right. Suddenly, the screen went black, and I heard a loud creaking sound coming from behind me. I turned around to see the door slowly closing on its own, but I knew that I had left it open. I tried to open the door, but it wouldn't budge. I was trapped in the server room, with no way out. Suddenly, the lights went out, and I was plunged into total darkness. I tried to find my way out, but my hands were shaking so much that I couldn't see anything. That's when I heard a faint whispering sound. At first, I couldn't make out what was being said, but then the words became clearer. "Get out, get out, get out," the voice whispered over and over again. I started to panic. I knew that someone or something was in the room with me, but I couldn't see it. The whispering continued, getting louder and more urgent by the second. I finally managed to open the door and ran out of the server room, my heart pounding in my chest. But the terror didn't stop there. As I made my way through the darkened office, I could feel something watching me. I could feel its eyes on my back, following my every move. I tried to run, but my legs felt like lead. The whispering continued, and I knew that I had to get out of the building before it was too late. As I reached the front door, I could feel something grabbing at my feet, trying to drag me back into the darkness. I kicked and screamed, finally breaking free and running out into the street. It was so terrifying that I lost sense of my surroundings and was fighting to run away. After that horrific incident, I never went back to that office again. The terror that I felt that night was too much to bear, and I knew that I could never work in an environment where I felt so unsafe. To this day, I still don't know what that presence was or why it was haunting me, but I do know one thing. I will never forget the terror that I felt that night, and I will never underestimate the power of the paranormal. I was working my night shift at the office, all alone. It was a regular routine for me, nothing new or exciting. I was sitting in front of my computer, typing away at my keyboard, when I suddenly felt a cold breeze behind me. I turned around, but there was no one there. It was strange, but I didn't think too much of it. I just assumed that maybe the air conditioning was acting up. But then, things started to get even more bizarre. The lights flickered and then suddenly went out, plunging the entire office into darkness. The only source of light was my computer screen. I tried to turn on the emergency lights, but they weren't working. My heart started racing as I realized that something was seriously wrong. That's when I felt the presence. It was like a cold, heavy weight pressing down on me, making it hard to breathe. I couldn't see anything, but I knew that something was there with me in the darkness. The silence was broken only by the sound of my own panicked breathing. I tried to keep calm and remind myself that there was probably a logical explanation for all of this. Maybe there was a power outage or some kind of electrical malfunction. But then, I heard footsteps. They were slow and deliberate, like someone was walking towards me on purpose. I turned around, but there was still no one there. The footsteps grew closer and closer, until they were right behind me. I could feel the presence breathing down my neck, and I knew that I had to get out of there. I tried to run, but my legs felt like they were made of lead. It was like the presence was holding me in place, keeping me trapped in the darkness. I don't know how long I was there, but it felt like hours. I was paralyzed with fear, unable to move or even scream. And then, just as suddenly as it had appeared, the presence was gone. The lights flickered back on, and the emergency lights illuminated the room once more. I stumbled out of the office, my heart racing and my mind reeling. I knew that I couldn't stay there, not even for a minute longer. I drove home as fast as I could, trying to shake the feeling of the presence from my mind. But the thing that still haunts me to this day is what I saw when I got home. In the darkness, I saw a pair of glowing red eyes staring back at me. I used to think that the night shift at my office was peaceful. However, I was wrong. I never expected to experience something so terrifying in my entire life. I work in an old building, and it is said that a spirit haunts the place. The ghost is believed to be a former employee who committed suicide in the office. Everyone in the office knows about the story, but no one talks about it. It was a regular night shift, and I was sitting at my desk, going through my emails when I heard footsteps. I thought it was one of my colleagues who had decided to work late, but when I looked around, there was no one there. I shrugged it off and continued working. A few minutes later, I felt a cold breeze, and the hairs on the back of my neck stood up. I turned around and saw a woman standing behind me. She was pale, with long black hair, and her eyes were completely black. I tried to scream, but no sound came out of my mouth. She whispered my name, and I felt her cold breath on my neck. I was frozen with fear, unable to move. Suddenly, she disappeared, and the lights flickered. I felt as if the temperature in the room had dropped by several degrees. I could feel the presence of something sinister around me. The air felt thick and suffocating. I tried to leave, but the door was stuck. I heard whispers all around me, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. The lights went out completely, and I was plunged into darkness. I could hear my heart pounding in my chest. As I fumbled around in the dark, I felt something grab my ankle. I screamed and tried to pull away, but the grip was too strong. I wasn't able to get it off me. In that darkness, I could feel a cold, bony hand pulling me towards something. I could see nothing, but I felt as if I was being dragged towards the edge of a cliff. I was so scared and terrified that I kept screaming, crying, and begging for whatever that thing was to leave me. Within a moment of time, there was a loud thud sound, and the lights came back on, and the grip on my ankle disappeared. I looked around, but there was no one there. I abandoned all my belongings and ran out of the office as fast as I could, not daring to look back. My heart was still pounding and my head was hurting with what had just transpired. The next day, I went to my boss and told him what had happened. He listened to me intently and then told me the truth about the spirit that haunts the office. Apparently, she was a former employee who had committed suicide in the office premises from the 7th floor after her husband left her for another woman. She had been depressed and had decided to take her own life in the office. She died, but her spirit stayed and still haunts the building. Ever since her death, strange things have been happening in the office at night. Lights flicker, doors slam shut, and people have reported seeing the ghostly figure of a woman walking around. My boss told me that many employees had reported paranormal events, but he had never experienced anything as terrific as what I had. Without any second thought, I quit my job the next day. I couldn't see myself working in that horror environment. I couldn't bear the thought of going back to that office, knowing that the ghostly figure of the woman was still there. It was an experience that I will never forget, and it has left me scarred for life. I have never been a believer in the paranormal, but that night changed everything. I will never forget the cold, bony hand that grabbed my ankle and the feeling of being dragged towards something. It was a night of pure terror, and I hope that I never experience anything like that again. I've been working as a night shift security guard at the abandoned factory for almost a year now. At first, it was just a job to make ends meet, but now I wished I had never taken it. I cannot help but curse and regret my decision. The factory is old and run down, and the eerie silence of the night makes it even more unsettling. No one prefers to take the road while traveling to a nearby location. One night, as I was patrolling the premises, I heard a faint whisper coming from the old assembly line. It sounded like someone was trying to communicate with me, but I couldn't make out what they were saying. I tried to brush it off, thinking it was just my imagination playing tricks on me, but the whispers continued throughout the night. The following night, I noticed that things had been moved around in the assembly line. I thought that perhaps one of my colleagues had been messing around, but when I asked them about it, they all denied any involvement. That's when I began to realize that something strange was happening in the factory. As the nights went by, the activity became more and more disturbing. I would hear footsteps coming from the empty corridors, doors slamming shut, and machinery turning on by itself. It felt like I was being watched constantly, and the feeling of unease never left me. The environment had become very intense and heavy. One night, as I was doing my usual daily rounds around the office floor, I saw a shadowy figure at the end of the hallway. My heart skipped a beat. It was standing there, motionless, staring at me. I tried to call out, but my voice failed me. The figure slowly started to approach me, and as it did, I could feel an intense coldness in the air. I was frozen with fear, unable to move or speak. The figure came closer and closer until it was right in front of me. I was hoping for it to be just another employee in the office and not anything else. I could feel its icy breath on my face staring right into me, and its eyes seemed to penetrate my very soul. It was then that I knew for sure that this was no ordinary event. This was something malevolent, something evil. Something horrible was unfolding in that office. I tried to run, but my legs wouldn't move. The figure just stood there, watching me, and I knew that I was going to die. I lost hope and all my strengths. I started to think about my beautiful family and was numb. But then within a blink of an eye, the figure disappeared, and I was left alone in the dark, trembling and sweating profusely. It felt as if nothing was ever there. I quit my job the next day and never looked back. I decided to look for something less haunting and more productive. To this day, I still can't explain what happened in that factory, and I'm not sure I want to. All I know is that I'll never forget the terror I experienced during those long, lonely nights.